Did you know that there are over 5,000 different varieties of apples? In fact, some pomologists have said that there are over 14,000 different varieties of apples. For someone like me that absolutely loves biodiversity, loves a good story, loves history, this is like the most incredible thing in the world. It's akin to tomatoes. Like, I love tomatoes as well. And there's over, some people say 7,000 to 8,000 different varieties of tomatoes as well. Same thing. The stories, how they got here, from where they started, and the journey and the people they reached, the different ways that they got cultivated and found, absolutely amazing. And so today's episode, we're gonna share with you 10, just 10 different varieties of apples that I bet you've never heard of before, that I'd highly recommend adding to your garden. And we're gonna share those stories of how they were discovered and how they became cultivated and potentially could end up in your garden. Let's go. So because history is so complex and there's so many different varieties, I actually have the stories of these varieties on my phone so I don't mess anything up. Now, this variety right here is known as the Pitmiston's pineapple. Now, the first Pitmiston's pineapple was bred in the 1780s by Mr. White, who was an employee of Lord Foley of Whiteley, who sold the breed to a nursery called Williams of Pitmiston, an old, very distinctive desert variety which produces small golden apples that are honey sweet, nutty, and also sharp. Some say it has the distinct flavor of pineapple, and it might taste a bit like pineapple, but others say it refers to the warm yellow color that it gives off when it's ripe. It is a russeted variety of apple, meaning it has kind of a russety potato texture to it, and it's only about the size of a large golf ball. It is absolutely beautiful, and again, dates back to the 1780s. Absolutely incredible that it lasted this long. And how does it last this long? It's because of people that found interest in it, decided to take cuttings, and those cuttings then were grown and cultivated, much like this was grown from a cutting that was grafted onto a rootstock. We've done videos on grafting, and it's continued on. So that is the Pitmiston's pineapple. Now, if you want to read the amazing history on some of these apples and even more others, I'd highly recommend looking up the website Pommiferous. It's not a sponsor, obviously, just a really great way to read on the history of these apples. And it's got an incredible database of so many different apples. I absolutely love it, and that's exactly where I get my history on these apple varieties. So the next one here is Bethl. And before I get into Bethl, I also want to mention that a lot of you are probably going to ask, how many varieties of apples do you actually have here on the farm? Believe it or not, here on just 14 of our 40 acres, we have about 600 different varieties of apples. Once we actually expand over into the other remainder of the property, we're going to take with us about another 1,200 varieties of apples, meaning in total, we're going to have roughly 1,800 varieties of apples, giving us one of the largest private collections of apples on this side of the Mississippi. It's really incredible. It's absolutely incredible, our collection. So this is Bethl. Now, Bethl starts out with a gentleman named David Stone, and one of the original settlers of what became known as the town of Bethl along White River in Princeton County, Vermont. Story has it the Stone and a number of the settlers in the Bethl area were taken prisoner during the course of the Royalton Raid, which took place on August 9th, 1780. When a party of 21 Mohawk natives attacked the Royalton area, capturing several settlers, Stone included, and driving them north to the Kanawake Reserve in Quebec, Canada. Sometime later, several of the men escaped and made their way back to the homes of Bethl, among them Stone. And his route took him past a cidery where he foraged some fallen apples to eat. He found them so good that he collected a small bag of pips, or seeds. They were almost certain to be blue pearmain, a type of apple that was grown at the time. When Stone arrived back home in Bethl, he planted them around the region, several pips or seedlings that sprouted from apple seeds and were grown using the seeds that he found from those amazing tasting apples, one of them being the Bethl apple. Now, is it the original blue pearmain? No, it's not, because it was grown from a seed, meaning it's totally unique and totally different. And that is the Bethl apple, dating all the way back to 1780. Up next is the white winter pearmain. Now, anytime you hear the name pearmain, as I just said, there was a blue pearmain in that last one, and that's what came from, that's what the Bethl apple came from, was the seed of a blue pearmain apple. This is a white pearmain. Now, pearmain just basically means a pear-shaped apple, and it is in fact one of the oldest strains of apples that we know of today, dating all the way back to as early as the early 1400s. Absolutely incredible, the documentation of the pearmain style of apple. Now, this white pearmain was commonly cultivated on the East Coast, and settlers brought them west as they traveled on horseback. Now, not a whole ton is known about who actually cultivated this variety. They were most likely brought over from Europe on ships, and then as settlers started to colonize different parts of the United States, they brought with them the white winter pearmain. Now, the white winter pearmain is known as a storage apple, but it's also a fresh eating apple. And basically, the only true documentation of this was done through essentially nursery records. People like Johnny Appleseed, essentially. Johnny Appleseed was not a guy that just frolicked around throwing apple seedlings everywhere. He was actually a nurseryman. And much like Johnny Appleseed, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of other nurserymen, just less notable, that they essentially were able to sell this variety to settlers going west. And because of that, they were able to properly date this tree to somewhere between the early 1700s and the late 1700s into possibly even the early 1800s of when it was actually, when it originated. And the killdeer are going crazy, which is kind of funny. But that is the white pearmain, absolutely beautiful apple, and one that we're really happy to have in the orchard. Up next is the Maiden blush apple. Now, this apple is known as a dessert apple, so it's a fresh eating apple like, think Honeycrisp or Gala. This variety was originated in the Burlington, New Jersey area in the late 1700s. It was named and promoted by a gentleman named Samuel Allinson. He was a nurseryman. It was first documented by William Cox in 1817 in a view of a cultivation of fruit trees and a management of orchards and cider, a very sophisticated book. William Cox is actually one of the the forefathers of the modern day apple, actually. He has so many different apples named after him that originated on his farm. It's just so many that people have really come to know and love. But it was as popular as an early season apple in markets of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania through the early 1800s and was widely grown through the southern United States. Maiden blush actually was kind of, for lack of a better example, this kind of was the Honeycrisp of the 1800s. And so this is a very culturally significant apple that most people never have heard of before. And the reason why it's known as Maiden blush is because it starts out green and then slowly will blush to kind of a bright red as it starts to ripen up, and then will even turn to a slight yellow hue. The apples that do turn can sometimes even move to a slight yellow. So it's really, really beautiful. And we're, again, really happy to have this in the orchard. It's a beautiful example of a Maiden blush apple tree. This little stick here is one day going to be a beautiful apple tree. Many of the apple trees here on the farm are known as newly grafted, and that means that they've not really had a chance to really branch out very much. They look no different than some of the apple trees we have in our greenhouse there that we grafted up ourselves. Obviously, it's a little bit more mature and maybe a little further along, but nevertheless, it's going to be a while before this looks like a nice, beautiful big tree. But it one day will. And this little stick right here is from a variety known as Stamen winesap. Now, I am actually old enough to know of a time when you could go into the grocery store and buy a winesap apple. In my opinion, winesap apples, though they're not as popular anymore, I don't even recall the last time I've seen one in a grocery store. They are absolutely incredible. They are crisp, super firm and sweet, a little bit tart, almost like a Macintosh. Macintosh really kind of replaced the winesap and has kind of become more of a mainstay variety in grocery stores rather than the winesap had. Now, The wine sap was an old American dual-purpose apple variety popular in Virginia. Almost certainly was of a wine sap seedling, meaning that the wine sap variety was a variety grown over in England, and the wine sap was essentially a certain variety. But then a gentleman that was Dr. Stamen of Leavenworth, Kansas, grew a wine sap pip and found it to be almost identical to the wine sap, though it had different colorations and slightly different texture, giving it the name Stamen wine sap. And that alone, that decision to grow that from Dr. Stamen, was actually the biggest reason why we have this amazing variety nowadays, because we would have just gone with the regular wine sap variety. But because he found in what most people argued was a far superior variety to the regular wine sap, the Stamen's wine sap had a better shelf life, had a better flavor, had better crisp crunch, and everything was more desirable about it. And so that one was more cultivated, and that's the Stamen wine sap. And there are many different varieties of wine sap, obviously, but this is the Stamen wine sap, and one that I have come to know and love as a kid. And we turned into apple juice with my grandma, and we would press down with my grandpa and grandma in their garage. It is just such a delicious, fresh, almost citrusy. It's just so good. It's got a great sweet, sour balance, and it's just a favorite of mine. So I'm really happy to have this on our farm. This slightly more mature stick is known as Winter John. Now, Winter John is one of those varieties of apples that people it's become like a game of telephone. People just kind of make up a story, and you hear so many of them. Now, this variety, Winter John, is a storage apple. It is intended to be used for drying, cider making, turning into both fresh and hard cider, but more popular than anything in the Appalachian region, which is where this does have its origin. No one is sure of who saved it or when it was exactly saved. The Winter John is used predominantly for making apple butter. Apple butter is the most quintessential Appalachian confectionery that you could possibly think of. I mean, I think it's more ubiquitous with Appalachia than Vermont is with maple syrup. I mean, it's just unreal. The Appalachian region is just so rich in history in making apple butter. And the Winter John apple is absolutely the go-to apple for that. And so though it doesn't have a ton of history, it's kind of like you hear stories of Winter John from just every small little rural town in Appalachia. Everyone has a story about it, where it originated, how it originated, and it's just such a phenomenal one. I've talked to so many people about Winter John, trying to get more information on it, and yeah, no one really has a conclusive answer, which is kind of interesting, but it's a really cool one to have. This beautiful apple here is known as Margel. Now, Margel has a really incredible history, and this variety was actually grown over in Europe, believe it or not. Now, the rumor has it that this variety was first cultivated and planted in the late 1600s, around 1680, by a gentleman known as Sir William Temple. And he grew this variety for the king at the Palace of Versailles. Now, in 1680 or so, the documentation of apples was not incredibly as documented, right? So there's, again, some variation that happens over time, because nurserymen didn't really exist until making a business around apples actually was kind of viable. And so when it came to cultivating varieties in Europe, it was not as popular as it was here in the United States. And so a lot of these super old, 1600s, 1500s apples, they've had some variation and shift and change, but the one that we know today as Margel is rumored to have started all the way back in 1680 at the Palace of Versailles. And so this is what they call a royal apple, which is really cool. Very, very pretty, very beautiful apple. And yeah, this is definitely one of the older apples we have at the farm. This little quirky guy is known as Canadian strawberry. Now, Canadian strawberry does have kind of a funny name, but it looks actually like a little bit like a strawberry. It's got some slight speckling to the skin, and it's a kind of a strawberry shape, in fact, when it fruits. Now, this variety here was planted at the farm of Nathaniel and Dora Davies near Salone, Maine in the late 1880s. And that is the only thing documented about it. So why it's super special or why it was decided to be cultivated and shared with the rest of the world is really not tremendously known. But I'm very happy to have it. And Canadian strawberry is one that, you know, I just think is a really unique name. It's going to be very cool to have this. And it's certainly one that I never heard of before. So I'm excited to see this thing grow and produce. Then we got here a variety called Bramtot. All I can think of when I hear this is Napoleon Dynamite. Get your hands off my Bramtots.
Napoleon, give me some of your tots.
No, go find your own.
Anyways, this is the Bramtot. This is super cool variety. Now, the history says this is a probable seedling of the cider cultivar Martin Fessard, raised from seed by nurseryman M. Legrand in Vetat in northwest Paris. This fruited in 1866 and was widely grown in the Normandy region of France through the late 1800s and early 1900s. Now, this variety here was used for cider, but the most common use for this is so improbable, and one that I was really surprised by. It's making apple jelly, believe it or not. I'm really excited to try my hand at making apple jelly with this because everyone says that this actually retains the most apple flavor of any of the apples when making apple jelly. So yeah, really excited about it. It's kind of like making a BLT with a beefsteak. Like, it's just something you just have to try. So I'm excited. Now, a little bit of a twist. We're not getting so niche now. We're getting into what's known as a breeder apple. Now, breeder apples sounds really bad, but breeder apples are essentially part of an apple cultivation program. Now, universities all throughout the United States would actually plant seeds, thousands of seeds, and grow them out in fields much like this. And every single one would be given just a random number. They wouldn't know anything about it. They wouldn't know if it was going to be a small apple, good apple, tart apple, who knows what type of apple. And then they'd essentially find characteristics that they liked. They would chop down the ones that don't make the cut in an effort to try to find better and better apples. And that is actually where this variety came in. Now, this variety is known as Regent. And Regent essentially was just it was part of the breeding program from the University of Minnesota. It was bred around a variety that is speculated to be the Duchess of Oldenburg. So it's a seedling of the Duchess of Oldenburg, apparently, and was crossed with Delicious. So like a red Delicious or golden Delicious, that Delicious strain, in an effort to try to find a new marketable variety of apple, and does date back as early as 1964. So it's not a really old apple, but it's still a heritage apple variety because most people, I don't think, has ever even tried a Regent apple. So I'm excited to have this one on the farm, and maybe we can do a head-to-head comparison of those different varieties and see which one we like best. And last but not least, this is Porter's Perfection. Now, Porter's Perfection is a variety that, again, doesn't have a ton of history on it. So many apples that you'll come across don't have a ton of history, and that's because there are so many varieties of apples that sometimes someone just finds a seedling that grows, because when an apple fruits, that apple is open pollinated, meaning it's taking in pollen from potentially tens or even several dozen different apples and crab apples around the area, giving it a totally unique, essentially genetic composition to all the other apples in the area. And so because of that, every apple is unique, every apple is different, and so there's not really a certain reason why one is saved over the other, but it gives some history. Now, this one here is known as Porter's Perfection, and all that's really known about it is that it was found as a chance seedling. That means as a seedling that just grows by chance, and was actually saved from a gentleman named Charles Porter of East Lambrook, Somerset in the UK in the late 1800s, and it was introduced in catalogs in 1907 among nurseries in the area of Somerset. And so it was widely propagated throughout the region, and Porter's Perfection is one that you can still find today in Europe as a very popular cider apple and fresh eating dessert apple. And so like I said, I'm really honored to have this history and this variety on our farm. And this is just 10 of over 600 varieties we have planted here in just 14 acres. And the final thing I'll say is that the whole purpose, you might be asking why? Why? What's the big why? It's because We want to preserve the history. And the reason why we have these varieties is because people like you have actually gone and adopted a tree. Over at MIgardener.com, you guys have actually gone and adopted a tree. And we do the hard research of finding ones we don't have yet and adding them to our collection so that we can actually save the history and the stories behind these varieties. And if anything were to ever happen, we could then take cuttings in the winter, we could graft them to rootstocks, just as they were once grafted to a rootstock, and continue on their genetics and the stories. So it's very important to us, and it's just a continuation of our love of heirlooms. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments box down below if any of these varieties you've heard of before, and if you've tried them, did you like them? Did you like how they taste? As always, thank you guys so very much. I appreciate all your support, and as always, grow bigger. Take care. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider clicking this one. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. Also, if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. It's free, and we upload videos every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. We also have vegetable seeds, fertilizer, or tools. If you need any of those, consider visiting MIgardener.com. Links will be in the description box below. We've got you covered. And as always, we'll see you all in the garden. Take care. Bye.